Saturday, December 21st, 2019, Maneco 64, home of alternative economics and contrarian views. This morning, I want to talk about the big inflation deception or lie, if you want to call it that. Before I start, you probably can hear the rain. It's raining very hard here this morning in London. It's been raining for the last couple of weeks. It's pretty bad. We've had a lot of rain. The golf course has been closed because of the rain, so I won't be playing much over Christmas. Before I go into the inflation deception, I just want to bring up a quote by Joseph Goebbels, who was the propaganda minister for the Third Reich. Some of you might know that. And one thing he said is, if you tell a lie big enough and keep repeating it, people will eventually come to believe it. So keep that in mind. Before I go into the inflation deception, I've done this in the past before in videos about inflation, and what I think is going on is to go through the definition of inflation. And to start, I will go look at my old Merriam-Webster Pocket Dictionary. It was my dad's. I've kept it. My dad passed away a few years ago. It's from the 70s. I can't really tell exactly what year it was, but it is from the 70s. You can see lost the back cover, so it's an old one. And I've marked here the page where we get the definition of inflation. The first definition, of course, is an act of inflating, the state of being inflated. 2, empty pretentiousness. And third, that's the one that interests us, an abnormal increase in the volume of money and credit, resulting in a substantial and continuing rise in the general price level. So listen very carefully. It doesn't say it's a rise in the price level, inflation. It says it's an abnormal increase in the volume of money and credit, resulting in a substantial and continuous rise in the general price level. Let's have a look at how I just Googled the inflation definition, and this is what's come up. Economics, inflation, a general increase in prices and fall in the purchasing value of money. Nothing about the increase in money and credit, abnormal increase of money and credit. The other point I would make is that in the last 35 years, even when I was at university, they've been teaching this new definition of inflation. There was even in 1996, and I remember buying the book. I haven't got that book. I don't know what happened to it. I might have lent it to someone, but it was written by a British economist, and it's called The Death of Inflation, Surviving and Thriving in the Zero Era. This was written in 1996. The guy's name is Roger Butto. It says here, British economist and a weekly columnist for the Daily Telegraph. He's the chairman of Capital Economics, an independent macroeconomic research consultancy. He and Capital Economics were awarded the Wolfson Economics Prize in 2012. So he's playing the game of the powers that be, this Roger Butto. And how can I prove that he was wrong about prices? Because this is what he means by inflation, a rise in prices, because he's using the new definition of inflation. So I've gone to the Bank of England inflation calculator, and I put a pound in 1996. Well, now a 1996 pound costs £1.84. So we've almost seen inflation have the value of the pound. Inflation's averaged, or it's really tricky because they keep calling it inflation, but it isn't inflation. It's prices average a rise of 2.8% a year. So the other thing as well, the inflation calculator is the price calculator for the Bank of England. It's very easy to make the mistake and be confused because everyone nowadays is calling a rise in prices inflation, and we know really that is the consequence. And why does that matter? Well, because they can tinker with these numbers and say that inflation is low or rising prices are low. And what does that give them the power to do? Well, it gives them the power to keep monetary policy more accommodative, gives them the power to keep interest rates low, to do QE, and the whole financial sector, the top 1%, top 10%, they buy into it because they're doing well from asset bubbles. But the bad consequence of this, in my opinion, is all the anger, all the populism, because the general public, the people who don't benefit from this asset price bubble, inflation of the money and credit, they feel the rise in the cost of living. Prices are not going down, they're going up, and I would argue they're going up even more than 2.8%, as the Bank of England here says. They do all the hedonic substitution, all the tinkering with the price level that they do in the US. They do it here and in other countries as well. The other website, or a website that I would recommend you go to see what they've done to the statistics to keep this measure that they call inflation, but which is actually prices or CPI down, is shadowstats.com by John Williams. He explains how they've tinkered and tinkered with the CPI, that the CPI or the rise in prices today should be more like 10%. And we keep getting headlines, which is really frustrating. One here from Business Standard says, "Rich world problem of low inflation has arrived in emerging markets." EU's new economy chief warns on bloc's budget rules ill-suited to the low-growth, low-inflation environment. So let's also have a look at the American inflation or rise in prices. There's a website called westag.com/inflation. I'll put the link below in the description. So I did the same exercise as the Bank of England calculator. So $1 in 1996 now cost $1.62. I would venture to say that's a lot higher as well. So yes, so this inflation deception, all it does, it gives the central bankers, the economists who are all in it. As Goebbels said, you tell a lie, a big lie, enough times, people start to believe it. So even Roger Bootle still believes it. He hasn't written another book saying he was wrong about the death of rising prices, because that's what they mean. And that's how they confuse people. We even get articles here in the UK, and I'm sure you probably get it elsewhere as well. When the CPI data come out, they call it the inflation numbers. I've been, how can I say, victim to using that term as well, because everyone's using it, so you fall into the trap. But actually CPI is a measure of prices. The Germans actually, they used to use the term cost of living data. The Germans had it right, but they were probably told you need to get in with the program and call it CPI and call it inflation. So how can I tell there's been massive inflation? Well, we are in a fiat currency system where debt is money. Just look at the rise in the debt levels we've had since the early 80s. The national debt in the US was under $1 trillion, and now it's over 23 trillion. That in itself is inflation. So what has been the positive or advantage for the powers that be, for the bankers, for the central bankers? Well, they've been able to extract a lot of wealth from you, from the general public, through this massive inflation. They've pretended that inflation is low, by calling the CPI inflation and by tinkering with the numbers, keeping them low. That's why we've got shrinkflation. That's why things are not affordable anymore. And their end goal, of course, is to own almost everything and to have you under their thumb, in debt. And it's been a huge deception, and that's why we're still seeing the Dow almost at 30,000, the stock market melting up. I think people are starting to realize that there's something wrong. Even the people who have benefited from this, that the dollar is going to lose its value, and that in of itself is inflation, and they're trying to buy anything but the dollar. So I think this game, this charade, this inflation deception is coming to an end. You can fool some of the people all the time, but you can't fool everyone all of the time, as Abraham Lincoln once said. So if you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. You can also follow me on Twitter, BitChute, Steemit, and DTube. I wish you all a great weekend. Take care. Bye.